One. What's up, guys? Simon here, and welcome to the Amino Biohacks Podcast. Today, we've got a very special guest, my good friend, Mark Hokan. Thanks for coming on the show, Mark.
No worries at all.
Mark has been keeping me in line, keeping me in one piece as a therapist probably for the last maybe 4 years, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, 5 years.
He really knows his stuff, and I thought today we're going to delve in on some kind of background and then look at kind of the work that you've done with athletes and any advice that you've got for kind of young up-and-coming athletes and how to stay fit and healthy. So do you want to give the guys a bit of background, how you got into your line of work?
Yeah, sure, definitely. First of all, apologies for the hair, the barnet and the moustache. This is lockdown, so it happens.
Like
taking guidance from you.
Up and front.
Yeah, up and out.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, so I've always been involved in sort of the wellness, health and fitness industry, and from a young age started off as a personal trainer, and then first I went to uni to study sports therapy when I was 18. Did that for maybe a couple of years and didn't really feel I was making progressions. So as a sports therapist back in early 2000s, there wasn't much opportunity to be working in the field. You were seen as a personal trainer still. So then I decided to retrain as an osteopath and then qualified 2010. And ever since then, I've combined the sort of personal training side, the sports therapy and the osteopathy for the last years. And that's why I like working with sports people, like working in those fields. So athletics, golf, you come across all sorts of people. More recently, it's been powerlifters. So I always feel as long as you know the body, you get a good understanding of it, you can apply it to each individual sport. And that's kind of been my journey over the last 15 odd years. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, interesting. And do you think that there's been any synergy from like doing the sports therapy? So it was sports therapy first and then osteopathy after. Do you think like having the sports therapy as your foundation, do you reckon that helped you kind of mold your philosophy type of thing as you developed? Or
Definitely. I mean, as an osteopath, you can go in any direction you want, really. You can go from the sort of classical to the cranial, to the animal osteopathy. And I always wanted to work in sports. So it kind of just reinforced the sports therapy side and think, okay, I'm more hands-on, increasing and reinforcing that philosophy of where I wanted to go. So it was a good foundation, but you always think, what's the next stage? And that's why I went down the osteopathic route.
Interesting. And with anybody, so say there was somebody listening who was thinking about going, like, kind of becoming an osteopath, like what advice would you give them, like from somebody who's been through the system? What advice would you give them looking back on?
It's because it's kind of it's a field where it's still relatively unknown. So I get called a physio all the time, and you kind of got to accept that that's the position that you're going to be. So you're slightly niche in that market.
Yeah, definitely.
And you have to, yes, whilst you're in university and learning, and throughout the 4 years, you feel kind of engrossed in it all. You think, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. But when you get out into the real world, you're starting all over again. You need to build up your experience. You need to kind of find which direction you want to go into. So they always said that when you're training, you come out as a safe osteopath, not necessarily a good osteopath. They just make sure that you're safe, you know what you're doing, but then it's up to you which path you take.
There's quite a lot of art to it, kind of type of thing. You build up over time.
Yeah. And that's the gift and the curse. So as an osteopath, you've got lots of flexibility about which direction you want to go, but then also as well, you can get a bit aimless in terms of like, where do I go? What courses do I want to do? What do I enjoy doing? So you kind of, in my year, which when I graduated 10 years ago, I'd probably say only 50% are doing it still. That gives you an idea of how many people have carried it on for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And there's the element of the financial side as well, in terms of you don't go straight into a job. You have to build up your list. You have to get your foundation, maybe work in another clinic, find out what clinics you like to work in. So it's good, but you've got to think about the long-term game. But is this something that I really want to do? Because 4 years full-time is a big commitment as well.
That's a really good piece of advice. So think about the long term, think about the long game, maybe stepping stones, like where do you want to end up? And then maybe like reverse engineer it and work back from there.
exactly end goal, and then always work backwards and say, is this the right path that I want to take?
Right, great. Just for anybody who doesn't understand, what's the big difference between physio, osteo? Like, give us the textbook definition.
Oh, textbook, no. it's a lot of fluff, like so many words, and they don't actually mean anything.
Okay, so from your point of view, what's the big differences?
Generally, it's a philosophy, so the way that you get trained. So, as an osteopath, we take a more holistic approach. So we look at the whole body and see where the connections are in terms of your shoulder pain. Is there some long-standing history where it could be like a knee injury and whatever? So without being too vague, you try and link the whole body as one. And then we're slightly more hands-on, stereotypically. So we do more soft tissue work, more stretches, whereas your physio, again, stereotypically is more rehab based. And so if you come with a shoulder problem, they'll kind of localize it to the shoulder and specifically work on that shoulder.
Really
but
good.
Again, there's a lot of gray areas where a physio might become a little bit more holistic with further training, so they become into that osteopathic kind of area, and then the same with an osteopath might become a little bit more physio based. So there's a huge crossover, and to the general population there's not much difference really. They won't really be able to tell.
Yeah, interesting. And I think one of the interesting points you're making there is that this idea, would you say that the physio, you would potentially maybe be more useful if you get an injury, whereas osteo is good for keeping the body in check all the time? Or what, is that a way to think about it?
Not necessarily. Yeah, I feel that osteopaths do see acute injuries, so they see them from the point, and we could be seen as that first line of defense of going, okay, how bad is this? We need to make a decision. If it's serious, we refer onwards, or actually can there's something that we can deal with it ourselves. So we're both holistic therapists. Musculoskeletal therapists. So if it's along the lines of muscle, bones, joints injury, we can deal with it from that sense. It's just the fact that you've got probably 30,000 physios out there and you've got 8,000 osteopaths. So you're more likely to be exposed to a physio as opposed to an osteopath.
And does an osteo build up a relationship? Is it like the type of thing that it's like ongoing, like consistent, like type of treatment, or like would you say
there's so many factors to that? I mean,
if someone comes, I guess, doesn't it? I guess.
Yeah, if someone comes in with an acute injury, you will find it, fix it, leave it, and then that's it. Okay, you're done. You're ready to go. If someone comes in with a long-standing issue, it might be a case of like, we need to check in on you every 2-3 months to see how you're doing. And a lot of that comes down to the cause. So if it's an acute injury, you roll your ankle playing a sport, there's a beginning and an end. There's a finishing point. Whereas if it's sitting at a desk, you get this chronic lower back pain, we can't get you away from the desk because that's your occupation, that's your work. So is it something that we have to manage over a longer period? So you get your end goal and then you work back from that and decide it's something we need to keep you getting back in for.
That's really, really helpful. It's really helpful to clarify. So in my head, I guess I've known you for so long, but it's actually good to solidify and understand the difference. So let's go in. Go on. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that you kind of, how much does that person want to get to that end goal? How much do you need to help them out? And if it's a case of that, you need to educate them a little bit more, you might need those touch points. So you might need to see them a little bit more frequently, but it's more to get them to understand the injury. And then once they feel educated enough, you can spread out the appointments and say, all right, you're fine for 6 months, just check in and we'll see how you're doing.
Okay, awesome. Let's go into the actual sports. So let's go with maybe the top 3 types of athletes that you work with. What would they be? You mentioned golf, athletics. Obviously, I know you from athletics.
So I'd say right now, definitely athletics, so sprinting, 100, 200 meter sprints. Your kind of gym goers, so people that are just lifting weights, to aesthetic trainers. And then on the other side of that, your general sports. So whether it's football, your recreational sports people, football, rugby, running's another big one, so long distance runners as well. Yeah, I'd say they're kind of the main areas that we're dealing with.
Okay, and with the athletes, so let's talk about what kind of issues you see with those guys. Like, what's the most common injuries you see with those guys?
Obviously, lower limb. You're looking at hamstrings is a big one. Feet is another big one. So you're looking at anything around the hip, the knee, and the ankle. So whether it's a joint related issue, but hamstrings is a big one in terms of obviously the sprint mechanics and how much load they're putting through their feet is another big one, depending on the timing of the season, the type of training that they're doing. So over the years, you start to get these patterns and trends. Okay, so beginning of the season, whilst they put more load, the feet become a problem. And then towards race season, hamstrings become a bit of an issue as well, because they're just explosive.
More speed. And with the feet, so let's say it's early on in the season, so somebody's got a foot injury, like what things do you normally see? Is it like heel? Is it ball of the foot? Can it be anything? Or is there any commonalities?
The heel's a big one. So you kind of got Achilles, could be an issue. The plantar fascia, just along the arch, is a big one. And then you've got your toes.
Such a pain, that one, isn't it? Any of the fascial stuff, like
anything fascial, you kind of thinking, right, we've got to nip this in the bud early, otherwise we could be here for quite a while. So you see those early warning signs, you discuss with the coach and go, okay, we need to change the setup or change something about this, because otherwise we could be here for quite a while.
Yeah.
And you always look at transitional times, so going from trainers to spikes, hill runs, all sorts of things. And that's when they go through transitional training periods, that's the time you think, okay, what effect is this going to have on the body?
Yeah, definitely. And so say I had an injury with my foot, it's early on in the season, what would be the plan of action? And you'd go to the coach and you'd say, right, what do we need to do here?
Reduce the volume straight away, reduce the impact, take away the aggravating factors, and then you'd look at the changes over the last 10 days and see what's increased. Is it an impact thing? Is it an incline if you started doing hills? And then you manipulate your volume, intensity and frequency. And then you're always trying to get the right balance between all those three factors.
Yeah, because
from a hands-on.
Oh, no, I was going to say, is it, because I guess that's part of the game that you're juggling, isn't it? It's obviously you want to get load to make the improvements, but then you don't, if you've done too much loading, obviously the body's overloaded, and that's where you run into injury. So I guess your job is you're always teaching on this balancing point where you're trying to optimize loading to improve performance, but then obviously without breaking the athlete. That's correct?
It's a tough one, because the coach is trying to obviously get them to the most optimal position, and we're trying to manage that journey along the way. So you've got to think a month, 2 months, 3 months ahead. Where's the end goal? What are we looking at? And when you get a new athlete into a new group, you're probably looking at about an 18-month journey, because you're going to expose them to new loads, and it's going to take some time for them to adjust. It's not until 12 months later where the body comes accustomed to it. So there is always like an 18-month, 2-year journey with a new athlete in a new group. Yes, that's how you look at it.
Interesting. So then say, so as the season goes on, we've moved away from feet injuries. So say then we're going into race season, or that transition period. So hamstrings. So like when people are trying to max out and obviously run PBs and run better times, like what's your normal thought process around hamstring injuries?
So generally of hamstrings, it's a transitional point of the race. So you're going from block starts into coming upright, and then there's the change in the hip angles. And then as you're getting towards the last 20 to 30 meters of the race, stress input in terms of trying to win, the mechanics can change. And then you become, we call it backside running. So the hamstrings are taking more load, and you lose that technique that you've been practicing for the last 6 months. So you've got to make sure that they're going into a race or a meet in peak physical condition. You make sure that the body's feeling good, and you kind of give them the little test to go, actually, the hamstrings are feeling good, they're feeling robust. And because you've developed that relationship over the last 6 to 8 months with their body, you kind of know their weak spots and how they run. So would you
say fatigue plays a big, I've seen like a lot of literature talking about fatigue plays a big role. Yeah. It's like, what's your thoughts on that?
You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So if you're racing a lot, your fatigue is going up, and then you're always on that threshold of going, okay, I could probably maybe get 1 or 2 races out of this, but before my hamstrings start to fatigue. So again, it's that juggling act between the two. And some athletes are slightly more robust, they have a higher pain threshold, their mechanics, they're less explosive, so you feel, okay, these guys can take a bit more impact. Whereas you get some who are like Ferraris, who go, right, you're doing 1 race and then we're resting you for 2 weeks, and then that's it, shut down. So this is the tricky bit, because you don't really know how their body's going to react till afterwards, and you're trying to predict the future. So if someone's hamstring goes, you go, actually, there was warning signs there. we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. So
Yeah.
that's when you reassess with the coach and the team and go, actually, okay, this person needs 10 days rest in between. That's just the way that they are.
And I guess when you've got driven athletes, I guess who really want to win and they want to push it and they want to do loading, they want to load, they want to run fast. I guess your job is to be like the voice of reason, to be the looking at long-term health of athletes, especially with younger guys, I guess, as well, like trying to take a bit more of a long-term view on their progression, and taking a bit more of the intensity volume out at earlier stage so that maybe it can help preserve them as they develop, would you say?
You always look at things, you try to look at objectively. The athlete is very subjective, quite emotional, going, oh, I've had a hamstring problem, means I can't race, I'm out for the season. It's like, well, hold on, let's step back a little bit. Let's go, how bad is this? And then you're always trying to, as you said, look at the bigger picture and go, actually, if we'll probably get you back in 4 to 6 weeks if you do all these things. And then you're trying to switch their focus to the negative, to the positive, and go, right, that's gone, that's happened, that's done. Let's change your mindset and let's look forwards and make sure it doesn't happen again, which is hard because you're talking about sort of people who are between 17 to 23, 24. So they're very focused on their one particular sport and that's all they think about. All these guys do is train, and they're training to race. So you've got to really manage them from that side of it as well.
Definitely. That's really some really good points there.
You're like a talking therapist as well.
Say, look, when you were talking about holistic approach, I guess it's not just holistic with the body, it's holistic including emotion and the mind and the coach, wants and desires and motivation, and there's so many things you're having to juggle. I guess it's the art and science of dealing with the mechanics of the body, but also the emotions of the human that you're.
Yeah, big time. And that's whenever you get a patient, whether it's in track or whether it's in a general clinic, you have to understand that person first before you can really start treating them, because until you get to that point, you have that disconnection there, and then the treatment is not really 100% focused on them. So you have to understand the person that you're treating in front of you first.
You are like an artist in some ways, and that sounds silly, but I guess that's you're working with a canvas, that somebody comes in and you have to prepare your paints and you want to build the correct canvas to then be able to go away and kind of create the masterpiece, as they say. And I guess that you have to build that over time. It doesn't just not something.
It takes time. It definitely takes time. Like new patients, I'll spend a decent, like an hour with them, and within that time you're getting to know them as a person first. And as you said, you're kind of working things out. What do they want? What do they want out of this? And that's why when you work in team sports, you get that length of time to actually develop that relationship with them. You're there 3 or 4 days a week with them, and you can start to understand them a little bit better.
If somebody's injured, so let's say somebody's listening now and they're injured, and you can obviously get very much in kind of, you can turn in on yourself, I guess, when you're in those dark periods when you can't do the thing that you love. What kind of advice would you be giving them? Would you be telling them to focus on working on the weaknesses, obviously rehabbing the injury, but what kind of mindset shifts would you be pushing them to make?
Well, it's I say you shift the mindset to the positives and go, okay, why did this happen? Let's break it down. Is it a fatigue thing? Is it a technical thing? Is it a strength issue? And then go, right, let's hone in on that and work on that, because everyone has their strengths, which is why they've got to that point. And you don't want to nullify that strength by focusing on the weaknesses too
100%,
much. So
100%. That's a really good point. I guess that I think it's just sorry to butt in there, but especially when you're in team sports and competitive sport, like what's got them there in the first place, like that aggression, that drive has got them to that place in the first place, is what also makes them great. So I guess it's also about you you're trying to manage that energy, aren't you, I guess?
You're exactly that. You're managing it. And it's exactly what you said. You've got to manage whatever skill that they've got. And at a younger age, they find it tricky to manage. But as they progress, you kind of think, actually, I can use this at the right time. Remember what you always used to say, order and chaos. Like that chaos, it's up there, order's down there. You kind of just always got to shift them both up at the same time.
One foot in each is the key.
Yeah, constantly. So, you have to look after the athlete from that aspect and go, okay, this is what you're really good at. This is what we need to work on. Don't forget about that, because that's your real strength. But we've got to make sure your weaknesses they're not too far apart, because if you got that, that's going to hold you back. Your weaknesses is what's going to hold you back. So let's push that up and do that kind of movement as opposed to separating them out too far.
Polarized too far. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's really good points there, mate. With injuries, what like with so we talked about foot, we've talked about hamstring. Let's go into the other sports that you mentioned. So like, what are the other really common things that you see with athletes?
Hips is a big one. Lower back is very key. If you're doing sort of your recreational gym guys, shoulders is another big one as well. You start to see trends based on injuries that you see. So at the moment, the trend is doing handstands and all this upside down inverted stuff, and they realize, oh, my shoulders aren't quite like my hips, I can't support my body weight. And so you start to see loads of stuff like that, and that is on trend at the moment. What can I do a handstand? Can I put it on Instagram? Does it look good?
I haven't tried mine yet. Probably end up.
I'd like to see that.
Do it.
Exactly. So yeah, it's interesting when you look at it from that point of view. So then shoulders is a big one. Not many people have the flexibility and the range in their shoulders to be able to do what they're trying to do. So then they get the impingements at the front, a lack of range of movement going into extension. So by breaking that down to the guys, they and applying it to the move that they're trying to do, they start to understand that a little bit better. So yeah, your key joints for me are always shoulders, hips, and ankles, because they're your ball and sockets. They take a certain amount of stress. They can adapt a lot more, but until the point where you reduce your adaptation, that's when they can start to struggle.
Interesting. So we've gone from talking about being injured. So let's go into prehab. Obviously, we want to maybe try and solve the problem before we get there for people listening. So what type of prehab tips would you be? What were your kind of 3 key points? Would you suggest for people to stop themselves from getting injured in the first place? Like, what would be your golden rules?
I would say always look for balance. Always kind of look for symmetry. So left to right, front to back, sideways. So you're always looking for how symmetrical am I? And it's not necessarily a point at the start, but eventually that might become an issue. So I would always look at left to right mobility. Look at the groins. That's always a big one. A lot of people have quite weak adductor muscles, so strengthen those up. Everyone goes on about the glutes and make sure they got strong glutes and this. Everyone forgets about adductors, and when I assess people, they're really relatively weak in comparison, and that can create its own issues. So you would do your, I hate using the word, but pre-activation. Make sure you switch those muscles on before you do the activity, and you can do that in a number of ways, whether you use bands, whether you use light dumbbells, weights and things like that. So you're always looking to warm your body up dynamically as opposed to your static stuff.
It's quite interesting what you said about the hamstrings. There's a lot of research on strengthconditioningresearch.com with Chris Beardsley talking about adductor strength being like the adductors being, when they've done EMG testing on the adductors, it's been like the most active muscle. Everyone thinks it's the quads during squatting, but the adductor is actually the most important muscle in terms of activity during squatting. And then also the fact that the adductor also acts like a second hamstring during sprint mechanics, right? So and it works both front and back side.
Exactly.
So it's a really, really interesting and key point for anybody listening, that like about what Mark's trying to get across is this idea of not neglecting, just because the muscles aren't your show muscles that you're going to walk around the gym with them out. They're actually they might be hidden away, but it's all the fine detail and fine points which really add up to make a strong, balanced athlete. I
always say if you look at sprinters and look at them front on, you want them to be like a train. You want the knees to go out in front of you. As soon as they start to whip round,
like me.
I've seen you. You're just like a truck coming.
You're 16.
Get out of the way. You need some brakes. But yeah, so try to prevent that whipping action of the legs as they're coming round. You've got to stabilise with the adductors. So they're a big stability muscle when you're trying to generate a lot of force and a lot of power. So that's a big key area in there. And then you look at their potential areas of stiffness, you look at their injury history and think, right, okay, you've had ankle issues. We've got to make sure that your ankle's quite mobile, it's ready to go for the activity you want it to do. So spend a few minutes warming your ankle up. And so it kind of is determined by their history and what they've had in the past, because then that gives them the reassurance as well. If you've had a hamstring problem, you want to kind of feel like you're doing something about it in the warm up to mentally feel like, okay, I've looked after that. I've checked in with there. It feels good. I've got my confidence. Now I'm ready to go.
It's a really great point. That's a really great point. I used to suggest this to athletes I've worked with in the past about taking injuries that you've had in the past, like the prehab exercises, the rehab exercises that you've been given, actually can then integrate and become part of your warm up once you've actually kind of cured the area and made the adjustments to the tissue architecture. It's about adding those elements in so that then kind of bulks out and makes your warm up more comprehensive, I guess.
It's when you label an exercise like rehab, prehab, training, it kind of then gets pigeonholed into a spot. But I mean, rehab is just another exercise, just that you're doing it maybe a slightly lighter load or whatever, but you can still then make that harder and progress that further with more weight, less reps, and it's another exercise.
100%,
so
100%.
You can keep that in there the whole way through.
Definitely. That's a really good point. So I think what Mark's saying is that use exercises, like figure out what the mechanics are of the movement that you want to enhance or adapt, and then it's about not just about the exercise, but it's about finding what really works for you and what works to cure your injury, but then also adding in the element of progression or regression to enhance those particular capacities or make them easier. But obviously, I guess you want to gradually improve them over time. So it's a really, really good point. Find what works and then use progression or regression to...
I always say what you're trying to do is make your muscles long and strong. That's all that you're trying to do. Get them long, but also get them strong. So you've got this nice strength over the whole range. If you're short and strong, any point you step outside of that, it's game over. It's game over. So
I always remember Tommy Yule from UK Athletics saying that the elite athletes are strong at the ends of range. I think that's exactly what you're saying.
That's what you've got to work towards. The general population are either long and weak or short and strong. And you've got to get that length in there. You have to. Otherwise, the chance of getting injured become higher because you can't step out of that range. That's the problem that you get. And then if you're in an explosive sport, you don't know in that millisecond what your range is going to be like.
I always remember one of the quotes I heard about flexibility and strength, this idea that flexibility without strength is instability and strength without flexibility is rigidity. It kind of... it always stayed in my head, the little like mnemonic or whatever you'd call it. But
and then you're after fluidity. That creates fluidity if you got both of them, because it becomes like elastic energy that you're pushing off, and it looks good. If it looks good, it feels good. That's the way that it is. So
that's some
coming out of them all today.
That's some really good points in there. So we've kind of talked about feet, we've talked about hamstrings, we've talked about adductor, hip, groin, we've talked about lower back, and we've talked about Instagram and doing kind of headstands and shoulder presses as well. No, there's some really great points in there, Marky. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're just going to look to wrap up. So guys, if you've got any questions or comments for Mark, if people want to find out more from you, Mark, where can they find you?
So I run 3 clinics across London, and they're called Purus Active Health. And we've got a combination of osteos, physios, sports massage therapists. So we try to do that all-encompassing treatment depending on what stage of injury you're at. They're based in Victoria, Covent Garden, and the City in Cannon Street. If you want to get in contact with us, you can look on our website, our email address.
We'll put a link. We're going to put a link just below in the comment section for anybody that wants to get.
If you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I just fire away, and then we can have a chat and see where your body's at, and if you need any advice, more than happy to help.
Awesome. I really appreciate your time today, buddy.
No worries at all. Good speaking to you.
Guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell below as well. So when we make cool content like this, you'll be the first to know about it. Leave any questions in the comment section and we will do our best to answer them. Mark, I really appreciate your time. Hope to get you back on soon.
No worries.
Take care,
Good speaking to you.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.